Alina Carter had a system for everything. She folded her apron the same way every morning, tucked her dark brown hair into a low bun using exactly 4 pins, and always arrived at the Grand Harlow Hotel 17 minutes before her shift began. She liked those 17 minutes. She used them to stand near the kitchen entrance, drink black coffee from a paper cup, and breathe before the chaos of the morning. Rush turned the 5-star restaurant into a controlled storm. The Grand Harlow was not the kind of place Alina had imagined working when she was 19 and dreaming about fashion school. But fashion school had cost money she did not have. And her mother's health had cost money she did not have either. And so Alina had learned to love the restaurant the way you learn to love a city you never planned to live in. She knew every regular guest by name. She knew who took their eggs scrambled and who wanted them barely touched by heat. She knew which tables caught the morning light and which chairs had a slight wobble you had to warn people about before they sat down. She did not know Richard Holloway. Not yet. He arrived on a Tuesday, which was the quietest day of the week, and he arrived without any fuss, which was unusual for someone who apparently owned 3 companies and had a floor named after him in a building downtown. Alina only knew this because Patricia, her coworker, had looked him up on her phone within 4 minutes of him walking through the lobby. Holloway Industries, Patricia whispered, pressing close to Alina near the hostess stand. He's loaded. Like, not just rich, billionaire, with a B. Good for him, Alina said, adjusting her apron. He's also staying in the penthouse for 3 months. Something about renovations at his main residence. Alina glanced toward the lobby. Richard Holloway stood at the front desk in a dark gray suit, speaking quietly to the receptionist. He was tall, with dark hair going slightly silver at the temples and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown. He was not smiling, but he did not look unkind. He looked like a man who had learned to keep his face very still so that people could not read him too easily. He glanced up at that exact moment and caught Alina staring. She looked away immediately and went back to arranging silverware with great concentration. He came into the restaurant that first morning and sat at table 7 without being told, which happened to be the table with the best light and no wobble. Either someone had briefed him or he had good instincts. Alina suspected instincts. She took his order without ceremony. He asked for black coffee, whole grain toast, and 2 poached eggs. He asked how long the eggs would take, and when she told him 8 minutes, he nodded and went back to the papers he had spread across the table. He did not flirt. He did not make small talk. He said thank you when she brought the food and please when he needed more coffee. And when he left, he folded his newspaper neatly and placed it at the edge of the table so she would not have to chase pages across the floor. Alina thought about him for approximately 45 seconds after he left, then forgot him entirely. This lasted 3 days. By Thursday, she had started to notice small things. He always came in at 7:45. He always sat at table 7. He read actual printed newspapers, not his phone. He worked through meals in a way that looked less like ambition and more like habit, like a man who had forgotten that breakfast was supposed to be a pause. He never chatted with other guests. But when the busboy accidentally knocked over a water glass near his table on the 3rd day, Richard helped clean it up, without being asked and told. The kid not to worry about it, in a tone that sounded like he meant it. Patricia had theories. He's lonely, she announced on Thursday afternoon. Rich and lonely. Classic. He seems fine to me, Alina said. That's because you're not paying attention. Alina was paying attention. She simply was not sure what she was paying attention to yet. The charity gala happened on a Friday evening at the end of his first week. The Grand Harlow hosted these events twice a year, and the entire hotel transformed for them. The restaurant became part of a larger event space. The lighting shifted from warm and practical to golden and soft. And the regular guests mingled with donors and city officials and people who wore jewelry that costs more than Alina's annual salary. Alina worked the gala as part of the waitstaff rotation, moving through the room with a tray of champagne flutes, navigating conversations in 3 languages and small clusters of people, who gestured with their hands without watching where those hands were going. She was good at this. She moved quickly and quietly and kept her expression pleasant without crossing into the forced brightness that guests sometimes found unsettling. She spotted Richard near the edge of the room, standing slightly apart from a group of men who were clearly trying to include him in a conversation he had not agreed to be part of. He held his champagne glass by the stem and looked like a man counting down the minutes until he could reasonably leave. Their eyes met again. This time, neither of them looked away immediately. He crossed the room toward her, which surprised her. People like him usually waited for the room to come to them. "You work the restaurant in the mornings?" he said. It was not a question. "I do," she said. "Alina Carter? Richard Holloway." He shook her hand like she was someone worth shaking hands with properly. "I wanted to say the eggs this week have been consistently excellent." She laughed genuinely, because it was such an odd thing to lead with. "I'll pass that along to the kitchen." "Please do." Paused. "Is it always this loud?" "The gala." "Yes. You get used to it." "I don't think I will," he said, but he didn't move away. They stood at the edge of the event and talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The city, the hotel, a book she mentioned she was reading that he had read 2 years ago and still thought about. He listened the way very few people listened, without waiting for his turn to speak, actually absorbing what she said. When the small orchestra in the corner shifted into something slower, he offered his hand. "Would you like to dance? Or is that outside your job description?" "Technically outside it," she said, and took his hand anyway. They danced in the space between the event and the corridor, away from the main crowd. And Alina was aware of his hand warm at her waist and the way he moved like someone who had been taught properly but had forgotten to be self-conscious about it. She was also aware that Patricia was definitely watching from across the room with an expression of profound personal victory. It was afterward, when the gala was winding down and the guests were filtering out in slow clusters, that it happened. Alina was returning a tray to the service corridor and Richard was heading toward the elevator. They met in the hallway outside the restaurant. The noise of the event muffled behind a thick door, the corridor quiet and golden under low lights. He stopped. She stopped. "Thank you for the dance," he said. "Thank you for asking," she said. There was a pause that lasted just long enough to change its nature. And then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and certain, not confused or accidental. It lasted only a moment. When he pulled back, his expression was quiet and searching. Alina's heart was doing something complicated in her chest. "Good night, Alina," he said, and stepped into the elevator. She stood in the corridor for a full 30 seconds before she remembered how to walk. That night, alone in her apartment, with her shoes off and her mind spinning, she made a decision. She had a job to protect. She had boundaries that made sense. She had learned a long time ago that the gap between her life and the lives of people like Richard Holloway was not romantic. It was structural. She decided she did not remember the kiss by Saturday morning. She had convinced herself almost completely. She arrived 17 minutes early, folded her apron, tucked in her 4-pins, and poured her black coffee. When Richard walked into the restaurant at 7:45 and sat at table 7, she walked over with her notepad and her pleasant professional expression and said, "Good morning." "The usual?" He looked at her for a moment with those still, unreadable eyes. "Please," he said, and neither of them said anything about the corridor or the dancing, or the kiss that Alina had decided very firmly had not happened. She was still deciding this when Frank, the doorman, waved at her through the lobby glass with a smile so wide it took up most of his face. She would find out the next morning exactly what. Frank had already decided for both of them. Alina arrived at work the next morning with her 4-pins in place, and her professional face firmly on. She had slept poorly, which she blamed on the leftover coffee she had drunk too late, and not on the memory of a quiet corridor, and warm hands and a kiss she had officially decided to forget. She was good at decisions. She had always been good at decisions. Frank was at his post by the front entrance as she came through the staff side door, his white gloves already on. His posture, the upright and dignified posture of a man who took enormous pride in opening doors. Frank was 63 years old and had worked at the Grand Harlow for 27 of those years. He knew the hotel the way Alina knew the restaurant, which was to say completely and devotedly. He also had the warmest, most unhelpfully perceptive eyes of anyone Alina had ever met. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he called across the lobby with a wave that carried more enthusiasm than a morning wave had any right to. "Morning, Frank," she said, not slowing down. "Congratulations. By the way," she stopped. "On what?" Frank beamed. His smile was the kind that took over his entire face and left no room for anything else. "On you and Mr. Holloway, of course. Gerald told me last night." "Lovely thing. About time someone softened that man up a little." Lena stared at him. "Gerald," she repeated. "Known Richard since he was young." He was very moved, apparently. Frank pressed one white-gloved hand briefly to his chest. "Said Gerald nearly cried." "Frank," Alina said carefully. "Nothing happened." Frank's smile did not change by even a fraction. It was the smile of a man who had watched the world long enough to know exactly when someone was lying to themselves. "Of course," he said warmly. "Have a wonderful shift." Alina walked into the restaurant with her face doing something she could not entirely control. Patricia was already there, restocking the bread station with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting to talk since the previous evening. She turned around, saw Elena's expression, and pointed at her with a bread roll. "Frank got to you," she said. "Frank got to everyone, apparently." Gerald talked. Gerald talked to Frank. Frank talked to Luis at the front desk. Luis talked to housekeeping. Tricia set down the bread roll. By 8 o'clock last night, the third floor knew. By 9, the kitchen knew. "I found out from the dishwasher." Lena sat down on the edge of a chair that was not meant to be sat on. "Nothing happened." Patricia looked at her with the gentle, exasperated expression of someone watching a person walk into a wall they could clearly see. "Alina." It was a moment. A gala moment. Champagne and low lighting. It did not mean anything. Did it feel like it meant anything? Alina did not answer, which was itself an answer. Patricia filed away with great satisfaction. The morning service began, and Alina moved through it with her usual efficiency, which was to say she was flawless on the outside while her interior was conducting a debate she had not asked for. Table 7 was empty at 7:45. At 7:52, she told herself she was not watching the door. At 7:58, Richard walked in, sat down at table 7, spread his newspaper open the way he always did. She walked over. "Good morning," she said. "The usual." He looked up. He studied her face for just a moment with those calm, reading eyes. "Please," he said. "And Alina," she waited. "You look like you slept about as well as I did." She opened her mouth, closed it, wrote down his order, and walked back to the kitchen. Patricia was leaning against the counter with her arms folded. "Well, eggs," Alina said. "To poached 8 minutes." The days that followed had a particular texture. Richard was at table 7 every morning. Alina served him every morning. They talked in short, careful exchanges that felt like two people navigating a room in the dark. Aware of the furniture, but not quite sure where everything was, he did not mention the corridor. She did not mention the corridor. They had reached an unspoken agreement to perform normalcy until it became real. It was not becoming real. On Wednesday, things became more complicated. Alina was in the lobby during her break, sitting on the bench near the window reading 3 pages of her book, when a woman walked through the grand front entrance with the kind of presence that made every person in the room adjust their posture slightly without knowing why. She was stunning in the specific, expensive way of someone who had always been stunning and had been told so enough times to wear it casually. Dark red coat, dark hair, a smile aimed at the front desk that could have powered the building. Alina did not know her. She knew the name within 4 minutes because Patricia materialized at her shoulder like a rumor given human form. "Claudia Voss," Patricia murmured. She and Richard were together for 2 years. Ended about 18 months ago. She's in the city for a foundation event, apparently. And someone told someone who told reception that she specifically requested a room here. Alina looked down at her book. "That's not my business," Patricia agreed. In a tone that suggested she thought it absolutely was, Claudia found Richard that afternoon in the hotel lounge, which Alina only knew because Gerald mentioned it to Frank. And Frank mentioned it to Alina with the careful, sympathetic delivery of a man who had decided he was personally invested in the outcome of this situation. Alina thanked him and went back to setting tables with great concentration. That evening, staying late to help with a private dinner event, Alina passed the entrance of the hotel lounge and heard Claudia's voice, low and warm and practiced. And then Richard's voice, quieter, measured. She did not stop to listen. She kept walking, but she heard 4 words clearly in Richard's voice, steady and without hesitation. She works here. Yes. She did not know the context. She did not know what had been asked or what came before. But she heard the flatness in it, the careful neutrality of someone creating distance. And her mind, which was very good at protecting her, assembled those 4 words into a meaning that made her chest go cold. She works here. As in, that is all she is. As in, do not read into it. Alina finished her shift with perfect composure. She drove home in the dark with the radio off. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time. By Thursday morning, she had made another decision. She was good at decisions. She had always been good at decisions. She pulled back. She served his table the same way she served every table, pleasant and efficient and impersonal. When he lingered over coffee and seemed to want conversation, she excused herself to check on another table. When he said her name in that quiet way he had started to say it, she responded briskly and moved on. She was building a wall, and she was building it. Quickly, because she had learned that slow walls had gaps that feelings could get. Through Dot on Friday afternoon, she went to see the hotel manager and asked about a transfer to the evening shift. She framed it as a scheduling preference. The manager said he would look into it. That night, alone in her apartment, she allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel everything she was pretending not to feel. Then she folded it up the way she folded her apron and put it away somewhere, eternal, and told herself she was fine. She was almost convincing. Saturday morning, Richard arrived at 7:45, and table 7 was already occupied by a couple celebrating an anniversary. He stood at the entrance, and Alina watched him from across the room register this, look around, and take a smaller table near the window. When she walked over, his expression was neutral. "Change of scenery," he said lightly. "The hotel is at full capacity this weekend," she said. "Can I get your usual?" He was quiet for a moment. "Alina, have I done something wrong?" She kept her face smooth and her voice professional. "Of course not. The usual." He looked at her for a long moment. Then softly, "Yes, please." She brought his breakfast, and he ate it, reading his newspaper, and when he left, he folded it neatly at the edge of the table as always. But he had not read it. She could tell because it was still folded the same way it had arrived. Not turned or creased or carried through by hands. That had actually moved. Through pages, he had sat for 40 minutes. With an unread newspaper and 2 poached eggs in, she had not once met his eyes properly. And she told herself this was the right thing. The sensible thing, the self-protective thing. Frank caught her arm gently as she passed the lobby on her way out. "Whatever you heard," he said quietly, "make sure you heard all of it." She looked at him. "Old Doorman hear everything," he said simply. "And young women sometimes only hear the part that confirms what they are afraid of." She did not sleep well that night either. Monday morning, Richard arrived at 7:45 to find table 7 empty and Alina not there. He sat down. He waited. A young man named Luis, borrowed from the front desk to help with the morning rush, brought him a menu he did not need and informed him that Alina was not on the morning shift this week. He said it with the careful neutrality of someone who had been told to say exactly that, and nothing more. Richard drank his coffee alone. He read 4 lines of his newspaper. Then he put it down and stared at the table for a while. He went upstairs and called Gerald. She requested a transfer, Gerald told him. Because Gerald had quietly become acquainted with Frank, and Frank had quietly become acquainted with most of the hotel. And information moved through the Grand Harlow, the way water moves through old pipes. Evening shift, starting Monday. Why? A pause. Gerald, Richard said. She may have overheard something, Gerald said carefully. Last Wednesday, in the lounge, Richard was very still. He thought back to Wednesday. To Claudia in the lounge with her practiced warmth and her pointed questions in the particular way she had of making observations sound like compliments. And then he remembered Claudia asking, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, whether the waitress from the restaurant was anyone important, and he had said, "She works here," because he had been refusing to give Claudia the satisfaction of a real answer. Because Claudia collected real answers and used them later, and he had not wanted Elena's name in her mouth with any kind of ammunition behind it. He had meant it as a deflection. It had apparently sounded like a dismissal. He put down the phone and sat with this for a while, which was something he was not naturally good at. He was a man who identified problems and acted on them with speed and precision. He was not good at the problems that required sitting with feelings long enough to understand them before acting. He had spent most of his adult life keeping his interior life very quiet and his professional life very loud. And it had served him well until a woman with 4 hairpins and a system for everything had started talking to him about a book over champagne and changed the temperature of every room he walked into. He called. Bryce, his younger brother, answered on the second ring with the casual cheerfulness of someone whose life was significantly less complicated. What's wrong with you? Bryce said immediately. Because brothers do not need preambles, Richard told him. Not everything. Enough. Bryce was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough to be significant. Then he said, You told her she works there. I was deflecting, Claudia. Richard. You are one of the smartest people I know, and genuinely one of the least intelligent when it comes to human beings. I'm aware.
Ow! Where is she now?
Evening shift. And apparently she has also submitted paperwork for a transfer to the hotel's sister property downtown. Gerald found out from Frank. She's trying to disappear entirely. Yes. Then stop sitting in a hotel room and go find her. Bryce's voice was not unkind, but it was direct in the way that only people who love you completely can be direct. Richard, you spent 2 years with Claudia being comfortable and completely unalive. You have spent 3 weeks having breakfast made for you by a woman who apparently makes you read newspapers without absorbing a single word. I think you know what matters. Richard hung up, changed out of his suit jacket, and went downstairs. Frank was at his post. He saw Richard coming across the lobby with a different kind of purpose than the measured, contained walk he usually used. And he straightened up with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose patience had finally been rewarded. Mr. Holloway, he said. Frank, where does Elena go on her days off? Frank considered this for exactly 1 second. Her mother runs a small diner on Calloway Street. Elena helps out there on her free mornings. She has today free before her evening shift begins. Richard nodded. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Frank's voice was warm. She's worth the drive. I know, Richard said. The diner on Calloway Street was not the kind of place Richard Holloway usually walked into. It was small and honest, with 4 tables and a counter with 6 stools and a menu written on a chalkboard that had been erased and rewritten so many times. The board had a permanent ghost of old meals behind every new one. It smelled like coffee and butter and something baking in the back, and the warmth of it hit him when he opened the door in a way that felt like an answer to a question he had not known he was asking. Elena was behind the counter, wearing a plain apron over her regular clothes, refilling a coffee cup for an old man reading a racing form. Her hair was down, which he had not seen before, dark and slightly wavy past her shoulders. She looked different here, more herself, somehow. Less arranged, she looked up and went completely still. He sat down at the counter. There were no other stools available, which meant he sat directly in front of her with no table between them and no professional distance either. Her mother appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, took one look at the two of them and at whatever was on both their faces, and disappeared again with the discretion of a woman who knew exactly when to absent herself. You're not supposed to be here, Elena said. I know. How did you find this place? Frank. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. Of course, Elena. He kept his voice quiet and level, the way he kept it when something actually mattered. Wednesday, in the lounge. What you heard. Her expression shifted, just slightly. The professional composure thinned at the edges. It was 4 words, he said. She works here. And I need you to know what those 4 words were doing because they were not what they sounded like. Put his hands flat on the counter. Claudia asked me who you were. She asked it the way she asks everything. Like she is collecting information to be used against me later. And if I had told her the truth, which is that you are the reason I have read the same 4 lines of newspaper every morning for a week, she would have used it. She would have made something sharp out of it and aimed it at both of us, and I did not want your name in her hands. Lena looked at him. She was very still. I was protecting the information, he said. I did it badly. I understand that. You could have said nothing, she said. Yes. I'm better at deflecting than I am at being honest about the things that matter to me. I've been better at that for a long time. He paused. I am trying to be less good at it. The old man with the racing form had gone very quiet at the end of the counter. Alina glanced at him. He looked pointedly down at his paper. Richard, she said, and his name in her mouth was different from how anyone else said it. Warmer, more careful. What are you actually saying? He met her eyes. I am saying that I came here because you are trying to disappear from my mornings, and I cannot be quiet about that the way I have been quiet about everything else. I am saying that whatever this is, whatever has been building since that corridor, it is not something I want to deflect or manage or keep neutral. I've kept things neutral my whole life, and it has made me very efficient and very alone. He paused. I do not want to be efficient about you. The silence was different from all the silences before it. This one did not have any more performance in it. Alina set down the coffee pot. She looked at him for a long time, and he let her, because he was learning that she needed to think before she spoke, and that this was not a hesitation, but a quality. You scared me, she said finally, not because of what happened in the corridor, because of what it meant, if it was real. People like you, in situations like this? She gestured slightly, meaning the gap between his world and this counter, this diner, this chalkboard menu. I have protected myself from that calculation for a long time. I know. He did not dismiss it. I am not asking you to stop being careful. I am asking you to let me prove that the calculation is different than you think. How? Dinner, he said. A real one. Not a gala, not champagne. Somewhere you choose. Somewhere that makes sense to you. And we talk the way we talked that first night before I ruined it by kissing you in a corridor without asking. You did not ruin it, she said quietly. No. No. A small smile appeared. But you could have asked. No, he said. I'm asking now. Not just for dinner. For the chance to do this correctly, whatever this is, from the beginning. She was quiet for one more moment. Her mother appeared in the kitchen doorway again, pretending to adjust something on a shelf. Alina turned to look at her. Her mother became very interested in a coffee can. Alina turned back. The smile had settled into something real and steady. Saturday, she said. I choose the restaurant. Saturday, he agreed. He stood up from the stool, and she looked up at him. And for a moment, they were just 2 people standing on either side of a counter with nothing performed between them. He reached across, and very gently, tucked one loose strand of hair behind her ear. The way someone does when they have stopped pretending they do not want. 2, she did not pull away. He walked out into Calloway Street and the cold morning air and got back into Gerald's car. Gerald looked at him in the rearview mirror. Well? Gerald asked. Saturday, Richard said. Gerald's expression was one of profound, quiet relief. He had, by all accounts, been waiting a long time for a Saturday worth driving to. The following week. Alina arrived at the Grand Harlow on Monday morning for her regular shift, 17 minutes early, 4 pins in her hair, black coffee in hand. She had requested her morning rotation back. The evening transfer had been quietly canceled. Frank was at the front entrance. He saw her coming from the end of the block, and his entire face became the smile. She was already laughing by the time she reached him. Miss Carter, he said, opening the door with a small ceremonial bow. It is very good to have you back. Good morning, Frank. Mr. Holloway arrived 10 minutes ago, he added, with the casual delivery of a man who had timed this perfectly. Table 7 shook her head. You are impossible. I am a doorman, he said pleasantly. I see everyone come and go. In 27 years, I have seen very few people walk through this door who actually belong together. He tilted his head slightly toward the restaurant. Those two do. Alina looked through the lobby toward the restaurant entrance. Through the glass, she could see the back of Richard's head at table 7. His newspaper open, his coffee cup at his right hand. Frank, she said. Yes. If I come back tonight and the whole hotel knows about Saturday, I am blaming you. Naturally, he said. I will have Gerald confirm the details. She walked through the lobby, smoothed her apron, and pushed open the restaurant door. Richard looked up when she came in, the way he always looked up when she came in, as if he had been waiting for exactly that sound. His expression did something quiet and certain when he saw her, something he no longer worked to hide. She walked to table 7 and stood across from him with her notepad. Good morning, she said.
Good morning, he said. His voice was warm in a way it had not been when she first met him, or perhaps it had always been warm and she had not been close enough to feel it. The usual? I think, she said, tilting her head slightly, that after Saturday, we might need a new usual. He looked up at her with the small, unhurried smile she had only seen a few times, but already recognized completely. I think you might be right. She wrote down his order, tucked her notepad into her apron pocket, and went to the kitchen with a lightness in her step that Patricia noticed immediately from across the room and celebrated in silence with a small, private fist pump. Outside in the lobby, Frank held the door for a couple checking out, wished them a good journey, and then stood for a moment in the quiet between guests, looking through the restaurant glass at nothing in particular. In 27 years, he had seen a great many things walk through his doors: luggage and heartbreak and honeymoons, business deals and long goodbyes, people arriving as one thing and leaving as another. But his favorite thing, the thing that never got old, was the moment when two people stopped pretending. He straightened his gloves, lifted his chin, and waited for the next guest. It was, all things considered, a very good morning.